On the surface lies the 100,000 tons of steel of a US super aircraft carrier, a weapon capable of wiping out an entire nation. But in the Strait of Hormuz, this giant is being held back by cheap wooden boats and rusty torpedoes. Why is a fleet capable of destroying the world powerless to open a passage only 39 kilometers wide? The answer lies in a death funnel. Although the strait is 21 nautical miles wide, the safe channel for oil tankers is a mere 2 nautical miles. In this cramped space, the advantage of US long-range missiles is completely neutralized. Instead, it's a close quarters battle, where the billion-dollar defense system has only 20 seconds to distinguish between a fishing boat and a fatal knife attack. Iran doesn't lock the sea with iron chains, they lock it with uncertainty. By planting mines and suicide drones hidden in the Rocky Mountains, they turned Hormuz into a no-go zone where the price wasn't measured in blood, but in the collapse of insurance premiums and the global energy market. The US wins every battle with firepower, but why has it failed to restore order? Let's decode the superpower's counterattack architecture below. To understand the Strait of Hormuz, don't look at it as a vast expanse of sea on a map. Look at it as a constricted funnel. Theoretically, the narrowest point of the strait is about 21 nautical miles wide. But that's a space deception. In reality, the safe navigation channel for supertankers giants, nearly 400 meters long, is only a mere 2 nautical miles wide. In military terms, vast space means freedom of maneuver. But at Hormuz, the narrow space has deprived the US Navy of its most powerful weapon, distance. Note this paradox. In the open ocean, the greater the power of a carrier strike group, the greater the safe distance they maintain around themselves. That's the rule of deterrence. Aegis radar systems can scan hundreds of kilometers, giving commanders minutes to make decisions. But at Hormuz, that rule is bent. The battlefield is so narrow that super warships are forced to approach the enemy at close proximity. As distance decreases, reaction time is compressed to the maximum. Your radar is still working, but the tactical horizon is obscured by Iran's coastal limestone cliffs. A signal that just appeared on the screen may be only a few kilometers from the ship's hull. You no longer have time to classify the target: a regular fishing boat or a suicide bomb. Sailors have only 20 seconds to make an answer. The geography of Hormuz is not only narrow, it is also incredibly treacherous. The Iranian coast is a labyrinth of deep trenches, coral reefs, and a series of small islands such as Abu Musa, Larak, or Keshem. For $1 billion destroyer, this is a navigation nightmare. But for the Iranian Revolutionary Guard, it is a giant showcase to hide its power. This jagged coastline allows Iran to deploy a hit-and-run tactic at a perfect level. Mobile anti-ship missile launchers can emerge from rocky crevices, fire, and disappear into the limestone mountains before Tomahawk missiles can leave their launch pads offshore. America's technological advantage is eroded by a variable that no AI can fully solve: widespread uncertainty. At Hormuz, the US faces not only gunfire, but also physical phenomena. The interference of radar waves bouncing off the coastal cliffs creates thousands of ghost targets. The dense electromagnetic environment makes filtering signals between thousands of civilian ships and a real threat breathtaking, probabilistic problem. Because of these harsh geographical features, the Pentagon recognizes a harsh reality. Iran doesn't need a carrier fleet to confront the US. They simply exploited nature to transform Hormuz into a sophisticated blockade system. They didn't lock the strait with an easily shattered iron padlock. They locked it with the very geometry of space, where firepower is replaced by a menacing silence. Iran understands a harsh reality of the 21st century. You don't need to sink the entire Fifth Fleet to win. You just need to make passage through the strait too expensive. Tehran isn't using a single weapon. They're using a resonance system designed to wear down both the finances and the will of their adversaries. This is the most frustrating defense for the US Navy. Mines are throw and forget weapons, but their true power doesn't lie in the explosion. It lies in forcing the enemy to stop. Look at the numbers. A rusty mine costs only a few $1,000s, but it can tear apart the hull of $1 billion destroyer. To clear a safe passage 2 nautical miles wide, the US has to deploy minesweepers moving at the speed of a pedestrian. While modern warfare is measured in milliseconds, naval mines drag the entire US fleet back to the pace of the 19th century. The US may have Mach 5 missiles, but they can't sweep mines at Mach 5. This speed mismatch completely neutralizes the technological advantage of the superpower. If naval mines are static traps, then speedboats and unmanned suicide boats are dynamic ghosts. Iran doesn't need massive warships, easily detectable by satellite. They use hundreds of small, inexpensive boats, weaving between rocky outcrops and civilian vessels. The goal of this pack of wolves isn't to sink US ships immediately, but to attack the nervous system. When a squadron of speedboats speeds toward an aircraft carrier, the US sailors are caught in a state of mental tension. Is that a stray fisherman or a suicide bomber? Every time a destroyer has to fire on a cheap boat, Iran wins another step in the cost-benefit analysis. They use military junk to trade for million-dollar American anti-aircraft missiles. Above the water, a network of radars and mobile cruise missile launchers, like Noor or Ghadir, are hidden within the coastal limestone mountains. The jagged terrain we discussed in Chapter 1 now serves as perfect protective armor. This is not just a fire threat, but the establishment of a kill chain. Detection, tracking, attack. Iran has turned Hormuz into a command line forbidden zone. Every movement of the US fleet is within the range of launchers that Tomahawk missiles can barely detect from a distance. Iran coordinates maritime drones, airborne drones, and underwater vehicles to create a matrix of false targets. When the Aegis radar is overwhelmed by hundreds of chaotic signals, the resulting misjudgment will lead to disaster. The US must constantly ask itself, what is a diversionary tactic and what is the fatal blow? By extending the tension down to the Red Sea through proxy forces, Tehran has reshaped the international negotiating table. They didn't close the Hormuz with an easily broken iron lock. They locked it with a cost network. The cost of detection, the cost of scanning, the cost of escort, and the psychological burden of being on active duty. Therefore, Washington cannot simply send in a few warships and consider the matter settled. To untangle this funnel, the US Navy must abandon traditional tactics and build something entirely new, a comprehensive counterattack architecture. The US isn't just deploying troops, they're deploying an artificial neural network. Here, each F-35, each destroyer, and each unmanned submersible is no longer an independent unit. They are cells in a system designed to see through, blind, and break. The first phase isn't firing, but determining reality. In the narrow and turbulent waters of the Hormuz, perceptual error is more dangerous than missiles. The US is starting with the sensor warfare layer. A multitude of unmanned aerial vehicles, UAVs, and unmanned submersibles, UUVs, are deployed to scan every square meter of the water's surface and seabed. At this point, artificial intelligence, AI, acts as the central filter. It must separate thousands of interfering signals from civilian fishing vessels to determine which is a real speedboat carrying explosives and which is a newly laid minefield. Without the ability to see the battlefield, the US will never be able to open the strait. Once the targets were revealed on the digital map, the US began the suppression phase. Aircraft carriers didn't just provide firepower, they were massive electronic warfare stations. Electronic warfare aircraft like the EA, one 8G Growler worked in conjunction with F-35 stealth fighters to burn out Iran's surveillance radars. The goal wasn't to destroy every launcher that would be difficult because they were hidden deep within mountains, but to cut off the enemy's ability to see. When Iran's anti-ship missile launchers were blinded and their command centers cut off, Tehran's command zone would collapse, turning even the most dangerous weapons into harmless piles of scrap metal inside the mountains. This is where the most frustrating part began: minesweeping. This was the speed bottleneck. The US was forced to use Avenger-class minesweepers and autonomous sonar mine hunting systems. Opening the channel is a military victory, but keeping it open is a strategic triumph. The US cannot simply strike once and then withdraw. This counteroffensive architecture forces the fleet to maintain a constant presence pressure. Mobile radar stations on captured outpost islands, continuous underwater patrols of UUVs to ensure no mines are replanted. The US is attempting to transform temporary firepower superiority into a lasting maritime order. However, while everything seems logical on the Pentagon's operational map, reality on the ground begins to bend theory. There are constraints that even the most advanced AI cannot foresee. Despite possessing a superior counterattack architecture, the US encountered a wall of harsh realities when venturing into the Hormuz funnel. This is when the superpower realized power is not proportional to effectiveness when your opponent is chaos. The US is strongest when it has space to deploy and depth to defend, but Hormuz deprives it of all of that. Here, everything is compressed into a narrow, suffocating corridor. The extremely close proximity between US warships and Iranian harassing forces creates tremendous psychological pressure. A single misstep in firing could ignite a full-scale war that neither side is prepared for. In this environment, ambiguity becomes a weapon. When a speedboat approaches, is it a provocation by a local commander or the opening shot in a full-scale attack? The US is bound by the strict rules of operation, ROE, while Iran exploits this ambiguity to wear down its opponent's patience. This is the most challenging economic problem: cost asymmetry. Iran can use inexpensive tools to force the US to expend its expensive and limited resources. Don't forget the human element. The scorching heat of the Gulf, the 24/7 combat readiness, and the pressure to make life or death decisions in a split-second environment filled with target interference. Civilian ships, small boats, seabirds, and Iranian decoy devices blend together on radar screens. The fatigue of sonar operators and the perceptual errors of the duty crew are constraints that no AI can completely eliminate. When human eyes begin to strain and machines become overloaded by electromagnetic interference from the cliffs, the flaws in the counterattack architecture begin to become apparent. Ultimately, the US cannot simply fight as it pleases. It is bound by political frameworks and international alliances. If the crisis is interpreted by the international community as a unilateral act of aggression by the US, Washington will lose strategic support and the ability to share the burden. Iran understands this very well. They don't need to stop the US fleet with gunfire. They only need to make US military action appear excessive or dangerous to the flow of trade. The US is caught between two sides. It must act to open the strait, but must restrain itself from destroying the international order it is protecting. As the constraints on the ground begin to shake military theories, the Battle of Hormuz is no longer limited to surface gunfights. It shifts to a new level: the global diplomatic chessboard. Here, the question is no longer who can sink whom, but who has the right to write the rules for the lifelines of humanity. By enlisting allies like Britain, France, Japan, and South Korea to send warships to the region, the US completely altered the nature of the game. Hormuz was no longer a point of contact between Washington and Tehran. It became a confrontation between international maritime order and selective instability. The presence of Allied flags provided absolute legitimacy. It transformed the US effort to open the strait from a unilateral military action into a mission to protect maritime justice. At this point, Iran was not only confronting the Fifth Fleet, but challenging the economic interests of the entire world. But Iran was not easily subdued on the political chessboard. They employed a cunning tactic, dividing the alliance. By putting pressure on the vast majority of ships, but allowing selective exceptions, ships from neutral countries or those with good relations with Iran, to pass through safely, Tehran is trying to prove one thing: the right to normalize the region must pass through its filter. They want the world to understand that safety in Hormuz is not based on distant international law, but on Tehran's permission. This is a battle for influence. Who is the real master of this maritime funnel? The US uses law to deter, while Iran uses the ground to bargain. This is the climax of the strategy. Iran uses Hormuz as leverage to pressure the US to lift sanctions. However, this excessive pressure inadvertently allows the US to build a more robust security architecture around this choke point. The US is not just dismantling minefields. They are dismantling Iran's unilateral control by establishing permanent monitoring stations and multinational patrol protocols. The trap Tehran set to ensnare the world economy is now becoming the pretext for the international community to tighten its grip around them. Ultimately, who wins at Hormuz doesn't depend on the number of ships sunk, but on which side establishes order after the smoke clears. The US is trying to prove that freedom of navigation is an inviolable physical constant. Meanwhile, Iran wants to turn it into a political variable that it can manipulate to its advantage. However, even if the US has won on the international chessboard and dominated on the water, a harsh reality emerges. In the final chapter, failure. In the most spectacular, victory. Let's look deeper into the asymmetrical logic that Iran has orchestrated. Iran doesn't need to win the war. They just need to prevent the US from creating a sense of security. This is where mathematics of attrition reveals its harsh reality for a superpower. The US is strongest at high speed, rapid detection, rapid destruction. But the narrow terrain of the Hormuz has forced the US into a slow-paced phase of warfare, mine-sweeping every meter of water, verifying every small signal, and constant escort under tension. As long as Iran maintains 4 key market sentiments, that there are still uncleared mines, that small boats could still appear, that there is still a risk of remines, and that there is the potential for unexpected escalation, the Hormuz is not truly open. The US may be able to suppress the crisis with force, but they haven't restored order. The biggest failure is being drawn into a slow-paced war of attrition, where operating costs skyrocket, personnel pressure increases, and the symbolic value of a naval superpower erodes with each passing day. A strait is only truly open when civilian ships believe it is. From a military perspective, the US can declare the waterway clear of mines. But from the perspective of London-based marine insurance companies, the question is, will war insurance premiums go down? This is the vulnerability that other rivals around the world are observing. They don't need to defeat the US in a direct gunfight. They only need to create chaotic spaces where the most advanced stealth technology or radar becomes meaningless against the stubbornness of geography and the fear of the market. The US has won militarily, but is now struggling to avoid getting bogged down in an endless victory. 850 Tomahawk missiles couldn't break through Hormuz in the way people imagined in Hollywood movies. Modern warfare at geographical choke points has taught us a costly lesson. Strength doesn't lie in the ability to completely destroy the enemy, but in the ability to decipher complex systems. The US has set a new precedent. Breaking a blockade is no longer a single gunfight, but a multi-layered overhaul. From blinding enemy radar and seizing strategic high ground to internationalizing maritime responsibility, Washington has proven that to confront a soft no-go zone, you need a robust counterattack architecture and an unshakable physical presence. In a Hormuz-style war, victory isn't measured by the number of ships sunk or launchers destroyed. It's measured by who has the patience to survive longer under the pressure of cost. If the US can maintain open shipping lanes and force its adversaries to accept a new order, it wins strategically. But if Iran retains the ability to terrorize markets with a rusty torpedo, it retains bargaining power on the geopolitical chessboard. Ultimately, the real victory belongs to whichever side establishes normalcy after the smoke clears. The Hormuz taught us how to confront the threatening silence. But can the US fleet withstand the chaotic noise of the Malacca Strait? Thank you for joining Navy Codex on this special feature. Don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss the next journey to decipher the Achilles' heel of global maritime power. Victory awaits.